Hey there, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight, a rise in suicide rates among young Black Americans. What approaches work to prevent them? Chicago officially has a new top cop. Hear about Police Superintendent Larry Snelling's vision. Prostate cancer can be a tough topic. We meet a survivor who says it's time for men to start talking about it.
This trail deserves the same love, care, and kindness that other communities get.
And advocates for the Major Taylor Bike Trail say it's helped keep them healthy. And now it's the community's turn to help the trail out. All that coming up. But our first story tonight, a troubling rise in suicide rates. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Suicide shatters communities anytime it happens, but it can be especially devastating when the person who has lost their life is young. And increasingly, Black communities are bearing that terrible burden. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says suicide rates increased by 37% for Black people 10 to 24 years old, the highest rise of any category. A National Institutes of Health study found among the youngest children, ages 5 to 12, Black children were 2 times more likely to die by suicide than their white counterparts. But research suggests early intervention can help save lives. Joining us now are Janelle Goodwill, Assistant Professor at the University of Chicago, and Tandra Rutledge, Director of Youth and Campus Programs at Soul Shop. Thanks to the both of you for joining us. Tough topic. Janelle Goodwill, the reported rise in suicide rates are alarming alarming people right now, but you've said that it's been a problem for a long time. Tell us more about the history.
Certainly. So right now we are seeing a significant increase, particularly amongst that group you highlighted earlier, those 5 to 12-year-olds. But I think what people don't recognize is that suicide has been a serious and leading cause of death among Black males in particular since the 1980s. It's just in the past recent years that we're starting to get more attention around this issue, particularly with support from the NIH and even by social media and through support from celebrities. But this has actually been a serious issue for several decades.
Why do you think that is? Why are we just now beginning to turn our attention here?
Well, I think that there's a few reasons. So one, I think that there's just a generational shift and an openness to address these topics publicly. I think that unfortunately we have seen some suicides amongst major celebrities, and so that always generates a lot of conversation. Then lastly, I do think that there's been additional increased support and funding for suicide prevention research projects from the NIH, and that's also been a way to ignite more conversation about this topic.
Tandra Rutledge, your organization Soul Shop, you all take a faith-based approach towards preventing suicide. Tell us about your work.
Thank you for asking, and thank you for having me on the show. Soul Shop, we are a Christian-based organization, and our goal is to equip faith leaders with the tools, the knowledge, and the resources that they need to actually minister to individuals in their congregations who are dealing with suicidal desperation.
Go on.
I was going to add that one of our main philosophies or beliefs is that, you know, information is great about suicide, but some of the main barriers to to preventing suicide are more emotional and have to do with stigma and shame and fear. And so we aim to address those issues within the faith community.
Janelle Goodwill, what kind of intervention does research show works for preventing suicide?
Well, that's a complicated question. There are a number of interventions, but one of the main issues is that in those research studies, there have been few Black Americans across all age groups that have been included in the research studies. So if there are only a few Black people in a research study, then it makes it really hard to draw any firm conclusions or implications from the study. However, research does show that early intervention, whether it's a school-based intervention or community-based intervention, where families have an opportunity to receive support early on that's accessible, can prove to be fruitful in preventing suicide and other adverse mental health outcomes.
Tandra Rutledge, from your experience, what are some of the factors that lead to thoughts of suicide, particularly in the Black community?
Well, what we know from research is that there is no single cause for suicide. We know that of all the reasons and all the causes for suicide, that it really comes down to two: a loss of hope and a loss of a social connection, connectedness to people. And so what we do at Soul Shop is we try to urge faith leaders to focus on how do we build hope and help people feel connected in community. And so that's one of the goals that we have at Soul Shop. So the reasons are multifaceted. I like to, and AFSP does a good job of this, of categorizing those risk factors into three. I think it's an easy way for everyday Americans to understand, especially Black Americans. You look for changes in people's mood. You look for changes in what people say or changes in their talk. You look for changes in behavior. And so when you look for those things, and you can go to afsp.org to look for some of those signs and symptoms, you see some of those signs and symptoms, and that can alert you to that person experiencing some difficulties.
Well, how do you encourage faith leaders to shift their approach a little bit? Like, well, let's pray about this, but let's also seek some help.
Yeah, I always say that Jesus in therapy is good, right? Prayer, and if you need medication, prescriptions are good. And what I think that as a Christian myself and a part of a faith community for a very long time is that I know that the faith community is committed to helping, but I just know that sometimes we just don't know what to say, the right things to say. And so we're attempting, Soul Shop movement is attempting to change that. We're attempting to empower and encourage faith leaders by using the Word of God, the biblical text. So what's different about Soul Shop is that it's not a secular training. It is rooted in the Word of God. And so we take faith leaders through the Bible, and we encourage them to find ways, and we actually give them a plan to identify ways that they can incorporate suicide prevention in the life and ministry of their church.
Janelle, what does your research show young Black people reported feeling that contributed to their suicidality?
Well, it aligns with what we've already heard, so thanks so much for mentioning that. But in a study that I published earlier this year, I collected survey responses from 18 to 30-year-old Black adults in the U.S., and the primary reasons that they reported considering suicide is feeling hopeless about the future and feeling that they could not live up to the expectations of other people. And so when we think about some of the benefits of faith and religiosity, it's certain, and it's really obviously important to consider the benefits that religion can provide in promoting hope and a purpose in life.
You've also said that the experiences of Black Americans in suicidality are understudied. Why is it important to get that specific kind of data?
Well, because we're seeing these increases. And so if researchers had taken the steps, I think, maybe 20, 30 years ago to think about how some of the risk factors might be different for Black Americans, perhaps we could already have a series of treatments that are available that take into account some of the lived experiences and the environmental factors that contribute to some of the stressors that Black Americans face every day. We know the pandemic has been a serious stressor for many people, but we know that there's been some serious impacts and differences in ways that Black Americans have experienced grief and loss during this time as well. So that's just one of many topics that we could address in thinking about the risk factors for suicide.
Tandra, how can untrained people help if they're worried that someone might be considering suicide?
That's a great question. One of the things that the messages that we have is that everyone can do something, right? It's everyone's responsibility. So you can know what the risk factors are. What are the signs? You know, just like we know the risk signs for someone who might be choking, right? Or having a heart emergency, a cardiac emergency, knowing the signs that someone is experiencing mental health distress, and then knowing what to do in that moment. You don't have to be a trained psychologist or a crisis counselor to check on your friends, to ask them if they're okay, to, say, I've noticed some things. I've noticed that you've been different. I've noticed that you've been down or sad or anxious. Are you okay? Don't be afraid to have the hard conversation, and then know what to do. If they say yes, and know how to seek hope, call 988, as that's the new suicide prevention hotline number.
Or visit the website that you mentioned.
Or visit the website,
for
afsp.org, yes, for additional resources.
Okay,
absolutely.
This is good to know. Thanks so much to Tandra Rutledge and Janelle Goodwill for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, what Chicago's new police superintendent has to say about accountability and community. Chicago officially has a new top cop. Larry Snelling was sworn in as the city's 64th police superintendent this week. Snelling is the fourth person to lead the Chicago Police Department in less than 9 months. The 54-year-old is an Englewood native and has spent 30 years in the department, most recently as chief of counterterrorism. Here are some of the remarks he made before City Council.
When I go to work or just throughout my day-to-day, I just try to do what's right. And I find that that's the most important thing. Just try to do what's right. And in this role, I'll continue to do that. History shows that when you just put the police out there to handle these problems, it doesn't resolve the problem. We need everybody involved. I told you I'm willing to talk to everybody in this room, and I will. We will meet. We will talk. But in order for this to work, as police officers and as a police department, we have to be a part of the community. You have to be a part of us. We have to support each other. When it comes to accountability for my officers, anybody will tell you this: I hold officers accountable. I will call officers out. If we have bad officers, I will call them out. But when our officers are held accountable, they have to be held accountable fairly. Our officers and your constituents are not that far apart in beliefs. Everybody wants to go home safe. Everybody wants good education for their children. They want their children to be safe, their grandparents to be safe, free of the possibility of being robbed or even killed. Let's work together and fight to build this city so that it is what we know it is. And we can showcase this to everybody else. We don't have to listen to their criticisms. We can hear them, but we know what Chicago is. So let the naysayers say nay. But we win when we stick together in this city and work together as a team.
And for more on Larry Snelling's comments to City Council, visit our website, WTTW.com/news. Prostate cancer can be a touchy subject for men to talk about, but especially for Black men, talking about it with their doctor can be a literal lifesaver. According to the CDC, among Black men, prostate cancer makes up about 37% of all cancers. About 1 in 6 Black men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lives, and Black men are twice as likely to die from prostate cancer as men of other races. Our next guests say the disease can also take a toll on the patient's mental health, and they encourage men to talk about that too. Joining us are Dr. Laura Farrington, medical oncologist with City of Hope, Chicago, and Will Parks, who was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2021. Thanks to you both for joining us. Will, thank you for sharing your story. You received your diagnosis in fall of 2021, as we said. How did you learn about it?
Actually, it was a process. I was with my primary care physician, and he ordered a bunch of tests because, you know, guys, you go to the doctor, they'll request certain tests. And one of the tests was doing a PSA screening. And we did the screening, and he noticed that the numbers were real high. And when he told me what the numbers were, I was like really surprised because I knew that African Americans, there was like a certain number. My number is like 31. It was like extremely high. Mm-hmm. And when I found out about that, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. I thought, oh my gosh, I probably have a couple months to live. But he sent me to a urologist, and the urologist looked. He said, well, don't worry. There's certain things that we can do. We can try some medications, and we tried something, and the number went half. It dropped quite a bit. So I was like, wow, this is great. This is great. But it still wasn't going down enough because it was still much higher than it should have been. So he actually asked me to take an MRI, and that's something I'm not really crazy about doing, but I did do the MRI, and they noticed that there was a spot, and they requested, well, you should take a biopsy. So at that particular time, that's when
So,
I contacted the city of Fulton.
so it sounds like
Yeah.
at some point they were able to confirm it for you. And as you said, I'm sure it was a frightening diagnosis to receive. Dr. Farrington, is Will's experience typical for men who are facing a prostate cancer diagnosis?
I think it is pretty typical. We often find these very easily with PSA screenings, which is a simple blood test, and then confirmation with a biopsy. I think what most people don't know, though, is that even with high numbers, prostate cancer is very highly curable.
And Will mentioned a reading. The PSA reading was 31, and it scared him. Give us a sense of what that number indicates.
So PSA is prostate-specific antigen. It's a blood test that's a tumor marker. Gives us an idea as to how many living tumor cells are in your system. Normal is up to 4, so above 30 is quite high.
It's quite high.
Yeah. So, Will, during the recovery process, you said that you also faced some mental health challenges. What helped you to push through that period?
A lot of it was being with community, helping a lot of family and friends. And I'm a Christian, so a lot of prayer helped me through it. Some of it that helped was some education, because I have a godfather that actually had been through prostate cancer about 25 years ago. So he gave me a lot of resources to help out. So I was educated. So I understood a little bit more instead of just being out there. And I definitely suggest that guys should learn as much as they can and definitely get screened early, because I know that's really important.
Absolutely. I mean, most Black people can probably count a number of men in their family who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer. I know there were several in my own. Dr. Farrington, what would you say is the biggest barrier to care for men when they're facing prostate cancer?
I think that it's just that prostate cancer is taboo. Men don't think to talk to their doctors about getting PSA screening. And especially for Black men, it's very important because prostate cancer tends to occur at a lower age and it is more aggressive. And so, like I said, it is a highly curable cancer. So I would encourage men to talk to their doctor about PSA screening, generally starting at the age of 40 for Black men.
Will, what advice do you have for men who have received a diagnosis? Okay, Will, I think you're frozen. We'll come, Dr. Farrington.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna. Will, are you there? What advice do you have for men who
here.
have received a diagnosis?
Advice for the men that have received a diagnosis is not to be too afraid. I mean, it's kind of hard to say, because when you get the diagnosis, immediately there's something that happens to you. You feel like, oh my gosh, you feel overwhelmed and you feel despondent. But trying to reach out to somebody and stay close to like a doctor. I really appreciate Dr. Farrington. She was really helpful during this journey. I mean, she made me feel comfortable and answered all the questions before and even after. So that does help out a lot. And I would say reach out to your family, because there was a lot of family that were praying for me and pushing for me, and they were telling me, hey, you're going to be all right. You're going to make it.
So reach out. Dr. Farrington, how has screening for prostate cancer changed? What do men need to know about that?
Well, the nice thing about screening for prostate cancer now is that we no longer use digital rectal exams for screening, so most men appreciate that. And,
Yeah.
Previously we would use, PSAs every single year. Now it's recommended to have conversations with your doctor about how often and when we should be screened. But, like I said, considering PSA screenings every year starting at the age of 40 for most Black men is what is recommended.
And, I don't think we've gotten to this, Dr. Farrington. Why are African Americans at higher risk?
Part of it is probably genetics. There do seem to be different genetic changes in Black men's tumors. They do tend to be more aggressive, tend to start at a younger age. But the other part is access to care. Simply that most Black men don't want to go to their doctors and seek out to get this screening. And so I think that's part of it too, is just the access to care, which is so important.
Will, just a few seconds left. Why do you think prostate cancer is so hard for men to talk about?
Like she said, I think in our mind we think about that old, the digital rectal exam, and it's really not. That's not too thrilling for guys. So, and then we really don't talk about health that much in the African American community. And that was one thing that my godfather talked about a lot. He's like, well, men should really talk a lot. They should discuss these issues, and they don't. So it needs to be opened up.
Okay. We'll have to leave it there. My thanks to you both. Will Parks, thanks so much for sharing your story. And Dr. Farrington, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, some black cyclists say their favorite spot to ride deserves more attention. The last 2 decades have seen some of the rail lines that crisscross the city converted into bike trails. But not all of those trails were created equal. On the South Side, champions of the Major Taylor Trail say it's helped them get on the road to wellness. Now, they're asking for the city and community to kick it into high gear and get the trail the amenities they say it deserves. Producer Erica Gunderson has the story.
It always makes me feel like a kid when I get on my bike. I've got the wind in my hair, I've got the sights, the sounds, the smells of just being outside, and it makes me feel like really young and free.
For members of the Major Taylor Cycling Club, riding along the Major Taylor Trail is a major part of staying healthy in mind and body.
It gives me peace of mind. It's very relaxing. Like, I don't listen to headphones or anything because nature is my sound system that I'm enjoying while I'm riding.
My doctors told me when they diagnosed me with COPD and type 2 diabetes, basically if I wasn't riding, I might not be here today. So this keeps me going.
Riding allowed me to see things in the neighborhood that I normally would not see, driving a car. It was basically mental health for me. So coming through here, able to talk to my girlfriend, able to come up here, see the greenery.
The trail is named to honor black cycling champion Marshall Major Taylor. Bill Gaston, who founded the Major Taylor International Cycling Alliance, credits the trail's namesake with getting him on a bike in the first place.
When I first learned about him and found out that he had all of his accomplishments, my thought was anybody that was African American should be riding a bike and cheering on Major Taylor.
And given all the trail has done for community well-being, the Major Taylor Cycling Club says it's time for the community to give some of that love back. The trail was completed in 2006, but as an early Rails to Trails project, Club Secretary Brenda Dixon says the conversion was pretty bare bones. And since then, the club says the trail needs more and better amenities to bring it up to the standards other local trails enjoy.
Porta potties, rest stops, chairs, garbage containers, better lighting.
Over 80% of the trail actually goes through communities of color. This trail starts at Dan Ryan Woods and it runs all the way to Whistler Woods. It's an 8.6 mile trail that runs literally, I'm not kidding you, through the heart of the south side of Chicago. That in the 90s, when the city was planning Rails to Trails projects, they weren't as, sophisticated as they are now with, like, you see the 606 trail that has all of these beautiful amenities. From our perspective, the trail has never been completed because we would like to have the same type of comprehensive planning that all of the other trails are getting today. And I will continue to advocate for this trail until it is up to standard like every other trail that's being planned today.
There are people that have joined the Major Taylor Club that had health challenges when they joined. And within a year or two of riding, health challenges have disappeared. It saved lives. This trail, given all that it has done, all we need is the same care on this trail like all the other trails. It will save lives.
For Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, this is Erica Gunderson.
The trail supporters have begun raising $100,000 to get a statue of Major Taylor himself along the trail, as well as calling upon city and county officials to make trail improvements. They're also looking to partner up with running and walking clubs to get some major activity going on the trail. You'll find out more on all of that on our website. And that's our show tonight. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And on a programming note, beginning next week, Chicago Tonight Black Voices will be on at 5:30 and 10 on Wednesday evenings. Wednesday evenings, everybody, streaming anytime. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.